Blood trickled down Savannah Wilcox's bare feet, crimson droplets stark against the dusty Nevada Territory soil, as she fled into the night, leaving behind the burning wreckage of everything she had ever known. The year was 1876, and the territory was as unforgiving as the men who had taken her family's homestead by force, claiming a deed that her father had sworn never existed. The moon hung full and bright in the sky, illuminating the vast expanse of sage and scrub that stretched before her. Her lungs burned from exertion, each breath becoming more labored than the last. Savannah had been running for what felt like hours, her cotton dress torn from catching on branches and rocks, her honey-blonde hair falling in tangled waves around her dirt-streaked face. "Keep moving," she whispered to herself, even as her vision blurred with exhaustion and tears. "They'll catch up if you stop." Behind her, somewhere in the darkness, she could hear the distant sounds of horses and men's voices. The Blackwell gang, notorious throughout the territory for their violent land grabs, wouldn't give up easily. Not when they'd already killed her father and brother, not when they believed the map to the mythical gold deposit was somewhere on the Wilcox property. Her feet, once toughened from years of ranch work but now cut and bleeding from the sharp rocks and cacti, could carry her no further. As she stumbled, her ankle twisting painfully beneath her, Savannah collapsed onto the unforgiving ground, a sob escaping her lips. "This is it," she thought, closing her eyes against the overwhelming despair. Her father and brother were dead. Their ranch was gone, and now she would join them, alone in this vast wilderness. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart race, but she lacked the strength to run any further. Savannah pressed herself against the earth, hoping the darkness and sagebrush might conceal her from whoever approached. The rider slowed, and then stopped entirely. She heard the creak of leather as someone dismounted, and then footsteps approaching her hiding place. Savannah held her breath, prepared for the worst. "Miss," a deep voice, unfamiliar and tinged with concern, broke the silence. "Are you hurt?" Savannah raised her head slightly, her eyes meeting those of a stranger. He stood tall against the moonlight, the silhouette of a cowboy hat visible against the star-filled sky. Not one of Blackwell's men, then they favored bowlers and derby hats, marks of their pretension to civilization despite their savagery. "They'll kill me if they find me," she whispered, her voice hoarse from thirst and fear. The stranger knelt beside her, and in the moonlight she could see his face more clearly now, strong-jawed and handsome, with eyes that seemed to reflect the starlight. "Who's after you?" "Blackwell gang," she managed to say. "They burned our ranch, killed my family." The man's expression hardened at the name. Without another word, he gently scooped her up from the ground. Savannah winced as he accidentally grazed the raw skin of her bloody feet. "Sorry about that," he murmured, carrying her to his horse, a magnificent palomino that stood patiently nearby. "I'm Xavier Prescott. Most folks call me Zav." "Savannah Wilcox," she replied weakly. Xavier's hands were strong and sure as he lifted her onto his horse. "You're in no condition to keep running, Miss Wilcox. I'll get you somewhere safe." As he mounted behind her, his arms encircled her waist to reach the reins. The solid warmth of him against her back was the first sense of security Savannah had felt since the attack. "Hold on," Xavier instructed, and then they were moving, the horse's powerful stride eating up the distance. Savannah leaned back against his chest, too exhausted to do anything but trust this stranger who had appeared like a guardian angel in the wilderness. They rode in silence for a time, the rhythm of the horse's gait almost hypnotic. Savannah fought to stay conscious, aware that succumbing to the exhaustion pulling at her might be dangerous. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible above the sound of hooves on packed earth. "My cabin," Xavier replied, his breath warm against her ear. "It's about an hour's ride from here, tucked away where Blackwell's men won't think to look. We'll clean up those feet of yours and figure out what to do next." Savannah nodded weakly, allowing herself to relax slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "Don't thank me yet," Xavier responded, a grim note in his voice. "Blackwell doesn't give up easily on something he wants." "It's land he doesn't own," she said, anger momentarily overcoming her exhaustion. "My father had the deed, fair and legal. They killed him for nothing. The gold they're looking for is just a legend." Xavier was quiet for a moment. "Gold has a way of making men lose their humanity," he finally said. "I've seen it before." The terrain began to change as they rode, becoming more rugged, with stands of pine trees appearing among the sage and juniper. Xavier guided his horse confidently through the darkness, taking paths that seemed invisible to Savannah's untrained eye. "Almost there," he assured her after they'd been riding for what felt like an eternity. "Just over this ridge." As they crested the hill, Savannah saw it a small cabin nestled among the pines, with a corral for horses and a small barn beside it. Smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting someone was home. "My partner Marcus should be there," Xavier explained, noting her questioning look. "He's trustworthy, former cavalry scout who saved my life more than once." As they approached, the cabin door opened and a tall black man stepped out, rifle at the ready. Upon recognizing Xavier, he lowered his weapon. "Xav, didn't expect you back tonight," he called, then noticed Savannah. "Who's this?" Xavier dismounted first, then carefully helped Savannah down. When her feet touched the ground, pain shot through her, and she swayed unsteadily. "This is Miss Savannah Wilcox," Xavier explained, supporting her weight. "Blackwell gang burned her family's ranch. She ran until her feet gave out. I found her about 10 miles south of here." Marcus's expression darkened at the mention of Blackwell. "Let's get her inside," he said, moving to help Xavier support her. Together, they assisted Savannah into the cabin. The interior was simple but clean: a table with chairs, a stone fireplace with a cooking area, and 2 beds against opposite walls. A bearskin rug covered part of the wooden floor, and kerosene lamps cast a warm glow over everything. They helped her to sit at the table, and Marcus immediately went to fetch water and clean cloths. "Let's take a look at those feet," Xavier said, kneeling before her. Gently, he lifted one of her feet, and Savannah couldn't suppress a wince. The soles were cut and blistered, caked with dirt and dried blood. "You ran a long way," he observed, his voice soft with something like admiration. "I had to," she replied simply. Marcus returned with a basin of warm water, clean cloths, and a bottle of whiskey. "This is going to sting," he warned as Xavier began to clean her wounds. Savannah bit her lip to keep from crying out as the warm water and then the whiskey made contact with her raw skin. Xavier worked methodically, his touch gentle despite his calloused hands. Marcus busied himself preparing a simple meal of beans and cornbread, the aroma making Savannah's empty stomach clench with hunger. "When did you last eat?" Xavier asked, noticing how she eyed the food. "Yesterday morning," Savannah admitted, "before they came." Xavier nodded grimly and continued his work. Once her feet were clean, he applied a salve that smelled of pine and herbs, then wrapped them in clean bandages. "You won't be walking far for a few days," he told her, rising from his kneeling position. "But they should heal clean if we keep them tended." Marcus set a plate of food before her, along with a cup of coffee sweetened with a little sugar. "Eat slowly," he advised. "Too much too fast will make you sick after going hungry." Savannah nodded gratefully and began to eat, forcing herself to take small bites despite her hunger. As the warmth of the food spread through her, the reality of her situation began to sink in more deeply. Her father and brother were gone. Their home was destroyed. She was alone in the world, dependent on the kindness of strangers. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back, determined not to break down in front of these men who had already done so much for her. "Miss Wilcox," Xavier said, sitting across from her, his own plate untouched. "I need to know everything that happened. The more I understand about Blackwell's interest in your land, the better I can help you." Savannah took a deep breath and nodded. "My father, Thomas Wilcox, moved us to Nevada Territory 7 years ago after my mother died. He bought 300 acres from an old prospector named Harlan Miller who was heading back east. We built our ranch from nothing, the Lazy W, we called it." She paused to take a sip of coffee, gathering her thoughts. "3 days ago, Calvin Blackwell rode onto our property with 5 of his men. He claimed Miller had sold him the land years before selling to my father, that our deed was worthless. Father told him to take it up with the land office in Carson City if he had a legitimate claim." Xavier and Marcus exchanged glances. "And they didn't like that answer," Xavier guessed. Savannah shook her head, her hands beginning to tremble. "They left, but Father was worried. He sent my brother Samuel to Carson City the next morning to check the records and get confirmation of our deed. Samuel never returned." Her voice broke, and Xavier reached across the table to briefly touch her hand in sympathy. "This morning, just after dawn, they came back, Blackwell and at least a dozen men. Father told me to hide in the root cellar. I heard shouting and then gunshots." Savannah swallowed hard. "They dragged Father outside. Blackwell was demanding to know where the map was, a map that supposedly shows the location of a lost gold mine on our property. Father kept saying there was no map, that it was just a legend." She stared into her coffee cup, unable to look at the men as she continued. "I heard more shots. Then they started tearing the house apart, looking for something. When they couldn't find whatever they were searching for, they set fire to the house and barn." "How did you escape?" Marcus asked quietly. "There's a back way out of the root cellar, a small tunnel Father built in case of Indian attacks when we first arrived. It comes out in a thicket of brush about 50 yards from the house. I waited until dark, then ran." She looked up, meeting Xavier's intent gaze. "I just ran and ran. I didn't know where I was going, just away." Xavier nodded slowly, his expression grim. "Blackwell's obsessed with finding that mine. It's rumored to be one of the richest deposits in the territory. He's been buying or taking any land that's even remotely connected to the old stories." "But it's just a legend," Savannah protested. "Father said Miller mentioned it when he sold us the land, but he never took it seriously. There's never been any map." "Doesn't matter," Marcus said, his deep voice somber. "Men like Blackwell create their own truth. If he believes there's gold on your land and a map to find it, nothing will convince him otherwise." Xavier stood and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. "We need to get you to Carson City, to the territorial marshal. Blackwell may have connections in these parts, but a double murder and arson will force the law to act." "And if they don't?" Savannah asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Xavier turned back to her, his face half in shadow. "Then I'll handle Blackwell myself." Something in his tone made Savannah shiver. There was history, their personal history, between Xavier Prescott and Calvin Blackwell. She could sense it as surely as she could feel the heat from the fire. "You should rest," Marcus said, breaking the tension. "You can take my bed." "I'll sleep in the barn." Savannah started to protest, but Xavier cut her off. "No arguments, Miss Wilcox. You've been through hell today. Sleep is the best medicine right now." Too exhausted to resist, Savannah allowed Marcus to help her to his bed. The clean sheets and soft pillow felt like luxury after her ordeal. As she settled in, Xavier brought her a cup of tea, willow bark, he explained. It'll help with the pain. She accepted the cup gratefully. Why are you helping me? You don't know me. Xavier was silent for a moment, as if weighing how much to tell her. Let's just say I have my own score to settle with Calvin Blackwell. Get some rest, Miss Wilcox. We'll talk more tomorrow. As he turned to leave, Savannah reached out impulsively and caught his hand. Thank you, she said simply. I'd be dead if you hadn't found me. Xavier looked down at her hand on his, then met her eyes. Something passed between them, a connection, a recognition. Then he gently withdrew his hand. Sleep well, he said softly, and moved away, leaving her to sink into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in days. Savannah awakened to sunlight streaming through the cabin's small window. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. This wasn't her room at the ranch. Then the memories flooded back. The attack, her father's death, her desperate flight through the wilderness, and Xavier Prescott's timely rescue. She sat up slowly, wincing at the pain in her feet and the stiffness in her muscles. The cabin appeared empty, but she could hear voices outside, Xavier and Marcus, speaking in low tones. On a chair beside the bed, she found clean clothes, a man's shirt and trousers that would be too large for her, but far better than her torn and bloodied dress. A basin of fresh water sat on a small table nearby. Gratefully, Savannah washed and changed, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs to make the borrowed clothes somewhat manageable. She found a piece of string to use as a belt, cinching the trousers at her waist. When she attempted to stand, pain shot through her bandaged feet, but she gritted her teeth and took a tentative step. Then another. By the time she reached the cabin door, she had developed a limping gait that, while painful, was manageable. Outside, the morning sun illuminated a scene of rugged beauty. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by pine trees, with mountains rising in the distance. A stream gurgled nearby, and wildflowers dotted the meadow. Under different circumstances, Savannah might have found it idyllic. Xavier and Marcus stood by the corral, deep in conversation. They both turned as the cabin door creaked open. You shouldn't be walking, Xavier admonished, hurrying toward her. I can't stay in bed all day, Savannah replied, lifting her chin stubbornly. And I can't keep imposing on your hospitality. I need to get to Carson City to report what happened. Xavier frowned, exchanging a glance with Marcus. There's been a development, he said carefully. Marcus rode into Lovelock early this morning to gather information. And Savannah prompted, a sense of dread building in her chest. Marcus stepped forward. Blackwell's already been to the local sheriff. He's claiming that you and your father were squatting on his land, that when he confronted you, your father drew on him and he was forced to defend himself. He's saying you set the fire out of revenge before running off. Savannah gasped, outrage flooding through her. That's a lie. My father never even owned a gun. He was a Quaker. He wouldn't have drawn on anyone, we know, Xavier said, his voice gentle but firm. But Blackwell has influence with Sheriff Hale. They're cousins by marriage, and Hale has already deputized some of Blackwell's men to search for you. They're calling you a fugitive. The implications hit Savannah like a physical blow. Not only had she lost her family and home, but now she was being hunted as a criminal. Her knees weakened, and Xavier quickly moved to support her, his arm strong around her waist. I can't believe this, she whispered, fighting back tears of frustration. How can they twist things so completely? Money and power, Marcus said grimly. Blackwell has both in these parts. Xavier helped her to a bench outside the cabin. We need to be smart about this. The territorial marshal in Carson City might listen, but we need to get you there alive first, and we need evidence. What evidence? Savannah asked, despair threatening to overwhelm her. "Our deed was in the house that burned. My father and brother are dead. It's my word against Blackwell's, and apparently my word counts for nothing." Xavier knelt before her, his eyes intent on hers. "Your word counts with us, Miss Wilcox. And I promise you Blackwell will pay for what he's done. But first, we need to keep you safe." Something in his steady gaze and the certainty of his voice gave Savannah hope. She took a deep breath and nodded. "What do we do?" Xavier stood. "We need to find your brother. If he made it to Carson City, he might have verified your deed before heading back, if Blackwell's men caught him on the return journey." He left the implication hanging. "And if they didn't?" Savannah asked, grasping at this thread of hope. "Then he could still be alive, possibly injured or hiding," Marcus suggested. "Either way, finding him or what happened to him is our best chance at challenging Blackwell's story." Xavier nodded in agreement. "Marcus will stay here with you. I'll ride to Carson City first, check if Samuel made it there and what he found out. Then I'll work my way back along the trail he would have taken, looking for any sign of what might have happened." "No," Savannah said firmly. "I'm coming with you." Both men looked at her in surprise. "Miss Wilcox," Xavier began. "Your feet are in no condition. My feet will heal," she interrupted. "This is my family, my fight. I won't hide while others risk themselves for me." "It's too dangerous," Marcus argued. "Blackwell's men are looking for you specifically." Savannah met his gaze steadily. "All the more reason I shouldn't stay in one place. And if my brother is out there, injured or hiding, he's more likely to show himself to me than to strangers." Xavier and Marcus exchanged looks, having a silent conversation. Finally, Xavier sighed. "She has a point," he admitted reluctantly. "You can't be serious, Xav," Marcus protested. "She can barely walk, she can ride," Xavier countered. "And having her with me means we're not split up if Blackwell's men find this place." Savannah could see the moment when Marcus relented, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Fine. But you ride double, keep to the back trails, and if there's any sign of trouble you get her out of there, no heroics." Xavier nodded. "Agreed." He turned to Savannah. "We'll leave at dusk. Less chance of being spotted that way. Marcus will head in the opposite direction, create a false trail to draw off any searchers." The rest of the day passed in tense preparation. Marcus packed provisions while Xavier tended to his horse and cleaned his weapons, a Winchester rifle and a Colt revolver that he handled with the ease of long familiarity. Savannah insisted on helping despite her injured feet, preparing food for their journey and mending a spare shirt of Xavier's for herself. As she worked, she found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the confident way he moved, the intensity in his eyes when he focused on a task, the rare smile that transformed his face when Marcus said something amusing. There was something about Xavier Prescott that drew her, beyond the fact that he'd saved her life. A depth to him, a sense of purpose and barely contained passion that intrigued her despite their dire circumstances. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing, Xavier approached her with a bundle of clothing. "Marcus found these in a trunk," he explained. "They belonged to his sister when she stayed with us briefly last year. They should fit you better than our things, and they'll be more practical for riding." The bundle contained a split riding skirt, a simple blouse, and a woman's jacket, all plain but serviceable. Savannah accepted them gratefully. "Thank you. I'll change right away." When she emerged from the cabin in her new attire, she found Xavier finishing the saddling of his horse. He looked up at her approach, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes, appreciation, perhaps, or surprise at how the simple clothes suited her. "You look ready for the trail," he commented, quickly returning his attention to adjusting the saddle cinch. Marcus emerged from the barn leading a second horse, a sturdy bay mare. "Change of plans," he announced. "You're taking Sadie too. It'll be slower with Savannah riding double, and you might need a second mount if trouble comes." Xavier looked like he wanted to argue but nodded instead. "Good thinking." As the last light faded from the sky, they prepared to depart. Marcus had packed their saddlebags with provisions, ammunition, and medical supplies. He handed Xavier a folded map. "I've marked the most likely route her brother would have taken," he explained. "Also the locations of friendly homesteads where you might find help if needed." Xavier tucked the map into his coat. "We'll be back within a week with or without news. If we're not, I'll come looking," Marcus finished. "But try not to make that necessary." The two men clasped forearms in a gesture that spoke of years of friendship and trust. Then Xavier turned to Savannah. "Ready," she nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. Xavier helped her mount his palomino, then swung up behind her. The second horse's reins were tied to their saddle. "Remember, back trails all the way," Marcus reminded them. "And Xavier, don't let your personal feelings about Blackwell cloud your judgment." Xavier's only response was a curt nod. Then he nudged his horse forward, and they were moving into the gathering darkness, leaving the safety of the cabin behind. They rode in silence for the first hour, Xavier guiding the horse confidently despite the limited light from the quarter moon. The trail narrowed as they entered denser forest, forcing them to proceed at a walk. Savannah was acutely aware of Xavier's presence behind her, the warmth of his chest against her back, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the occasional brush of his hand against her waist as he adjusted his grip on the reins. "How did you know to find me last night?" she finally asked, her voice hushed in the quiet of the forest. Xavier was silent for a moment before answering. "I was tracking Blackwell's men. I've been watching their movements for months." "Why?" Another pause, longer this time. 3 years ago, Calvin Blackwell accused my father of claim jumping a silver mine near Virginia City. It was a lie. My father had the legal rights to that claim, but Blackwell had the ear of a corrupt judge. My father was convicted, sent to prison in Carson City. Savannah could hear the controlled anger in his voice, feel the tension in his body. "He died there 6 months later. Official reports said pneumonia, but a guard who was sympathetic told me he'd been beaten repeatedly by other inmates who were paid by Blackwell to make his life hell." "I'm so sorry," Savannah said softly, understanding now the personal nature of his vendetta against Blackwell. "Since then, I've been gathering evidence of Blackwell's crimes. Land fraud, intimidation, assault, even murder. But he's careful, covers his tracks. The territorial authorities won't move against him without solid proof. And now he's done it again," Savannah said bitterly. "To my family." "Yes, but this time it might be different. Double murder and arson are serious charges, even for someone with Blackwell's connections. If we can prove your legal ownership of the land and find witnesses to contradict his version of events." "Like my brother," Savannah finished. "If he's still alive." Xavier's arm tightened briefly around her waist, a gesture of comfort. "We'll find him, or we'll find out what happened to him." They continued through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat a cold meal of jerky and hard biscuits. As dawn broke, Xavier guided them to a sheltered ravine where a small spring provided water. "We'll rest here for a few hours," he decided, helping Savannah dismount. Her feet throbbed painfully as they touched the ground, but the bandages Xavier had applied had prevented further damage. Xavier efficiently set up a small camp, unrolling bedrolls in the shelter of a rock overhang that would hide them from casual observation. He watered and tended to the horses, then heated coffee over a tiny, nearly smokeless fire. "We're making good time," he told her as they sat side by side, cradling tin cups of strong black coffee. "At this rate, we should reach Carson City by tomorrow night." Savannah nodded tiredly, exhaustion from their night journey catching up with her. Xavier noticed her eyelids drooping and gently took the cup from her hands before she could spill it. "Sleep," he urged. "I'll keep watch." Too tired to protest, Savannah stretched out on the bedroll, asleep almost instantly. When she woke, the sun was high in the sky, filtering through the trees above their hiding place. Xavier sat nearby, his back against a tree, rifle across his knees, alert but relaxed. "How long did I sleep?" she asked, sitting up and brushing hair from her face. "About 4 hours," he replied. "How do your feet feel?" Savannah experimentally flexed her toes, wincing slightly. "Better, I think. Still sore, but not as raw." Xavier nodded and reached for his saddlebag. "Let me check the bandages before we move on." He knelt beside her and carefully unwrapped the bandages. His touch was gentle as he examined her feet, applying more of the healing salve before rewrapping them with clean strips of cloth. "You have a healer's hands," Savannah observed. A small smile touched his lips. "My mother was a midwife and herbalist. I learned a few things from her." "Where is she now?" Savannah asked. "She died when I was 16. Influenza epidemic of 66. "So you've lost both your parents too," she said softly. Xavier nodded, finishing with the bandages and sitting back. "It changes you being alone in the world." "I'm finding that out," Savannah said, a wave of grief washing over her as she thought of her father and brother. Xavier's expression softened. "You're not alone, Savannah. Not anymore." The way he said her name, it was the first time he'd used it, instead of Miss Wilcox, sent a flutter through her chest. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Savannah felt a connection forming between them, born of shared loss and the intense circumstances that had thrown them together. Xavier was the first to look away, rising to his feet. "We should get moving. I want to cover as much ground as possible before dark." They packed quickly and resumed their journey, this time with Savannah riding the bay mare. Her improved mount gave them greater speed and maneuverability as they followed the back trails toward Carson City. As they rode, Xavier pointed out landmarks and signs that only an experienced frontiersman would notice: tracks of deer and elk, the subtle differences in vegetation that indicated water sources, the distant smoke from a homesteader's chimney that they carefully avoided. "You know this country well," Savannah commented as they paused on a ridge overlooking a valley. "I've spent most of my life in the Nevada territory," Xavier replied. "My father was a prospector, always chasing the next strike. We moved around a lot until he found that silver claim near Virginia City." "And after he died?" Savannah asked gently. "I drifted for a while, did some scouting for the army, some hunting and trapping. Met Marcus during a skirmish with a Paiute war party. He was cavalry then. We both wanted more independence than the army allowed, so we pooled our savings and bought that cabin and the surrounding 100 acres. It seems peaceful there," Savannah observed. Xavier smiled slightly. "It is, or it was, until I started my campaign against Blackwell." They continued riding, the terrain gradually changing as they descended from the higher elevations. By late afternoon, they had reached a point where the trail divided, one fork continuing toward Carson City, the other veering south toward the route that would have taken Samuel Wilcox back to the ranch. Xavier reined in his horse, considering. "This is where we need to make a decision. Continue to Carson City to check the land records, or follow your brother's likely return route to look for signs of what happened to him." Savannah bit her lip, torn. "I want to know if Samuel made it to Carson City, if he verified our deed, but if he's out there somewhere, hurt or hiding." Xavier studied her face. What's your instinct telling you? She closed her eyes briefly, trying to connect with some inner wisdom. When she opened them, she had her answer. Samuel first. The records in Carson City aren't going anywhere, but if my brother needs help, every hour could matter. Xavier nodded approvingly. I agree. Let's follow his trail. They turned their horses onto the southern fork, moving at a cautious pace as Xavier scanned the ground for signs of recent passage. The trail followed a shallow stream for several miles before entering a narrow canyon with steep walls rising on either side. I don't like this, Xavier muttered, surveying the terrain with a practiced eye. Perfect place for an ambush. Savannah felt a chill despite the afternoon warmth. Should we go around? Xavier shook his head. It would take too long, but stay alert and be ready to ride hard if I give the word. They proceeded through the canyon, both tense and watchful. Every falling rock or call of a bird made them start. When they finally emerged on the other side without incident, Savannah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Xavier, however, remained vigilant. Someone's been through here recently, he said, pointing to faint tracks in the dusty ground. Several horses, maybe 4 or 5 riders. Blackwell's men, Savannah asked anxiously. Could be. Or just travelers. Let's keep moving. They continued for another hour, the sun sinking lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the land. Xavier's attention was focused on the trail, looking for any sign of Samuel Wilcox's passage. Suddenly, he reined in sharply, holding up a hand for Savannah to stop. He dismounted and knelt to examine something on the ground. When he looked up at her, his expression was grave. There was a struggle here, he said quietly. See these marks? Someone was dragged from their horse. And these, he pointed to dark stains on the dusty earth. I think that's blood. Savannah's heart pounded painfully in her chest. Samuel's? I can't be certain, Xavier admitted, but the timing would be right. This happened a few days ago based on how the tracks have weathered. Is there a body? Savannah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Xavier shook his head. No, but there are drag marks leading into those trees. He pointed to a small grove about 50 yards from the trail. Savannah dismounted, her injured feet forgotten in her anxiety. We have to look. Xavier nodded, drawing his revolver. Stay behind me. They approached the grove cautiously, Xavier scanning for any sign of danger. As they entered the shade of the trees, Savannah gasped. There, propped against a trunk, was a man bound, gagged, and clearly injured but alive. Samuel. She cried, rushing forward despite Xavier's attempt to hold her back. Her brother's face was bruised and swollen, his clothes torn and blood-stained. But his eyes widened in recognition as she reached him, pulling the gag from his mouth. Savannah, he croaked, his voice hoarse from lack of water. How? What are you doing here? Looking for you, she said, tears streaming down her face as she worked to untie his bonds. Oh, Samuel, I thought you were dead. Xavier appeared at her side with his canteen, helping Samuel take small sips of water. Easy, he cautioned. Not too much at once. Once Samuel had drunk, Xavier examined his injuries, a bullet graze along his ribs, now infected, and what appeared to be a broken arm, crudely splinted with branches. Blackwell's men? Xavier asked grimly. Samuel nodded weakly. Ambushed me on my way back from Carson City. Said I'd seen records I shouldn't have seen. They shot my horse, then me when I tried to run. Must have thought I was dead when they left me here. What records, Samuel? Savannah asked urgently. Did you confirm our deed? Better than that, Samuel said, a hint of triumph in his pained voice. I found proof that Blackwell forged his claim to our land. The territorial recorder showed me the original sale from Miller to Blackwell, but the date was wrong. It claimed to be from 1865, but the paper had a watermark from a mill that didn't exist until 1869. Xavier's eyes widened. That's exactly the kind of evidence we need. Did you bring copies of the documents? Samuel nodded faintly. Inside coat pocket. Recorder gave me certified copies of both Deed's ours and Blackwell's forgery. Xavier carefully reached into Samuel's coat, retrieving several folded papers. He examined them briefly, then tucked them securely inside his own coat. This changes everything. Now we have proof of Blackwell's fraud. Savannah was focused on her brother's condition. We need to get him to a doctor. He's burning with fever. Xavier nodded grimly. The nearest town is Summit Springs, about 10 miles west. There's a doctor there, old but competent, and more importantly, not in Blackwell's pocket. Can he ride? Savannah asked worriedly. Xavier considered Samuel's condition. Not alone, I'll take him on my horse, you follow on the mare. With great care, they helped Samuel to his feet. He was weak and unsteady, leaning heavily on Xavier. Getting him onto the horse was a painful process that left Samuel gray-faced and sweating, but finally he was mounted, with Xavier behind him to keep him secure. We'll need to move slowly, Xavier warned Savannah. The terrain is rough, and any jostling will worsen his injuries. They set out as the sun dipped below the horizon, traveling by moonlight. Samuel drifted in and out of consciousness, his fever clearly worsening. Savannah rode close beside them, her heart aching for her brother's suffering and her mind racing with the implications of what he discovered. The proof of Blackwell's forgery was their weapon now, a way to clear their name and bring him to justice. But first, Samuel needed to survive. The journey to Summit Springs seemed endless. Every groan from Samuel felt like a knife in Savannah's heart. Xavier maintained a steady pace, occasionally murmuring reassurances to both siblings. It was well past midnight when they finally saw lights in the distance, the small settlement of Summit Springs, nestled in a valley. As they approached, Xavier directed them toward a modest house on the outskirts of town, where a lantern still burned in the window despite the late hour. Xavier halted their horses and carefully dismounted, supporting Samuel to prevent him from falling. Savannah hurried to help, and together they half-carried Samuel to the door. Xavier knocked firmly. After a moment, the door opened to reveal an elderly man with white hair and spectacles, dressed in a nightshirt and robe. He took in the scene before him with a quick professional assessment. "Gunshot wound?" he asked briskly. "Yes, and a broken arm," Xavier confirmed. "The wound's infected." The doctor stood aside. "Bring him in. Put him on the table in the back room." They followed his instructions, laying Samuel on a sturdy wooden table in what was clearly the doctor's surgery. Lanterns were lit, instruments were gathered, and the doctor set to work, cutting away Samuel's shirt to expose the angry, inflamed wound on his side. "You two wait outside," he ordered. "I'll need space to work." Reluctantly, Savannah allowed Xavier to lead her to a small sitting room. She paced anxiously while Xavier stood by the window, keeping watch. "Will he be all right?" she asked, her voice small. Xavier turned to her, his expression softening. "Your brother is strong. He survived days without treatment that shows remarkable resilience, and Dr. Porter is skilled. I've seen him save men with worse injuries." Savannah nodded, trying to take comfort in his words. "What do we do now? With the proof Samuel found," Xavier considered the question. "We need to get these documents to the territorial marshal in Carson City. With evidence of forgery and fraud, plus your testimony about the attack on your ranch, we'll have enough to bring charges against Blackwell." "And then?" Savannah asked. "Even if Blackwell is arrested, his men are still out there. Our ranch is gone. I have nothing left." Xavier crossed the room to stand before her, his eyes intent on hers. "You have your life, your brother, the truth, and—" He hesitated, then continued more softly, "You have me if you want my help." Savannah looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth in his gaze despite the gravity of their situation. "Why are you doing all this for me? I told you about Blackwell and my father," Xavier began. "Yes, but this is more than just shared enemies," Savannah said. "You've risked your life for me, a stranger." Xavier was quiet for a moment. "When I found you that night, running barefoot and bleeding in the wilderness, I saw something in you that reminded me of myself after my father died, determined to survive, no matter the cost. But I also saw something I've lost: hope, decency, the belief that justice is possible." He reached out hesitantly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I want to help you find justice because it might help me believe in it again myself." The touch of his fingers against her cheek sent a warmth through Savannah that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. She was about to respond when the doctor entered, wiping his hands on a towel. "Your brother will live," he announced without preamble. "The bullet only grazed his ribs, but the wound was badly infected. I've cleaned it, stitched it, and given him laudanum for the pain. The arm is set properly now, though he'll need to keep it immobilized for several weeks." Savannah sagged with relief. "Thank you, doctor. Can I see him?" The doctor nodded. "Briefly. He needs rest more than anything." Savannah hurried to the surgery where Samuel lay sleeping, his chest rising and falling in a regular rhythm. His wounds had been bandaged, his arm set in a proper splint and sling. She took his hand gently, overwhelmed with gratitude that he was alive. "We found the proof, Samuel," she whispered. "We're going to make Blackwell pay for what he did to father and to you." Behind her, Xavier spoke quietly to the doctor. "We need a safe place for them to stay while I take the evidence to Carson City. Is there someone in town you trust?" the doctor considered. "Martha Swenson runs a boarding house on the edge of town. Her husband was a sheriff before he was killed standing up to men like Blackwell. She'll take them in and keep quiet about it." Xavier nodded. "Good. I'll leave at first light. The sooner I get these documents to the marshal, the better." Savannah turned from her brother's bedside. "I'm coming with you." Xavier shook his head firmly. "No, you need to stay with Samuel, and it's safer for you here, away from Carson City where Blackwell might have men watching for you." "But my testimony can wait until the marshal comes here," Xavier finished. "The documents are enough to start proceedings against Blackwell. Once the marshal has those and hears my account, he'll come to take your statement officially." Savannah wanted to argue further but knew he was right. Samuel needed her, and splitting up would make it harder for Blackwell's men to find them both. "Promise you'll be careful," she said instead. Xavier's expression softened. "I promise. I have too much to come back for now." The doctor cleared his throat. "If you two are done making eyes at each other, I suggest we all get some rest. I'll have my housekeeper prepare rooms." Savannah blushed, but Xavier merely smiled slightly. "Thank you, doctor. We've imposed enough. If you can direct us to Mrs. Swenson's boarding house, we'll head there now." The doctor waved a hand dismissively. "At this hour? Nonsense. Martha will be asleep and your friend here needs rest before being moved again. My housekeeper will show you to the guest rooms." Too exhausted to protest further, Savannah allowed herself to be led to a small but clean bedroom. The doctor's housekeeper, a kind-faced woman who had apparently been awakened by the commotion, provided her with a nightgown and fresh water. Alone at last, Savannah sank onto the bed, emotions overwhelming her. Her brother was alive. They had proof of Blackwell's crimes. For the first time since the attack on their ranch, she felt a glimmer of hope. But mixed with that hope was a new and unexpected feeling: her growing attachment to Xavier Prescott. In just 2 days, he had become central to her world, her safety, her future. The thought of him riding alone to Carson City, potentially facing Blackwell's men, filled her with dread. "Please come back safely," she whispered into the darkness, before exhaustion claimed her and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning came too quickly. Savannah awoke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the sounds of activity in the house. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, then memory returned, and with it urgency. She dressed quickly in her borrowed clothes and hurried to find Xavier. He was in the kitchen, speaking with Dr. Porter over coffee. Both men looked up as she entered. "How is Samuel?" she asked immediately. "Resting," the doctor replied. "The fever broke in the night, a good sign. He's young and strong, he should recover fully with time." "Can he be moved to the boarding house today?" The doctor nodded. "By this afternoon, yes. I've already sent word to Martha Swenson. She's preparing rooms for both of you." Xavier stood, and Savannah noticed he was dressed for travel, his gun belt fastened securely around his waist. "I need to leave soon," he said. "The sooner I reach Carson City, the better." Savannah felt her heart constrict. "How long will it take?" "Riding hard, I can be there by nightfall. A day, perhaps two, to locate the marshal and present the evidence. Another day to return, 3 days at most." "Unless something goes wrong," Savannah said quietly. Xavier's expression softened. "I'll be careful. Blackwell doesn't know about the documents yet. I'll have the advantage of surprise." Dr. Porter excused himself, giving them privacy. Once they were alone, Xavier approached Savannah, taking her hands in his. "I need you to promise me something," he said, his voice low and intense. "If I'm not back in 4 days, take Samuel and go east. Marcus knows people in Colorado who can help you start over." "No," Savannah said firmly. "I'm not running, not anymore. If you don't return, I'll find another way to bring Blackwell to justice." Xavier's grip on her hands tightened. "Savannah, please. Your life is more important than vengeance." "Is that what you believe for yourself?" she challenged. "Would you run if our positions were reversed?" His silence was answer enough. Savannah continued more gently. "We'll both be careful. You come back to us and we'll finish this together." Xavier searched her face, then nodded slowly. "Together," he agreed. The moment stretched between them, charged with things unsaid. Impulsively, Savannah rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his cheek. "For luck," she whispered. Xavier turned his head slightly, their lips almost brushing. "I make my own luck," he murmured, then stepped back, composing himself. "I'll see you in 3 days." With a last long look, he departed, leaving Savannah standing in the kitchen, her fingers touching her lips where his breath had warmed them. The day passed slowly. Savannah divided her time between sitting with Samuel, who drifted in and out of sleep, and helping the doctor's housekeeper with household tasks to distract herself from worry. By late afternoon, Dr. Porter declared Samuel well enough to be moved to the boarding house. A wagon was arranged, with Samuel carefully placed on a pallet of blankets for the short journey. Savannah rode beside him, holding his hand when the rough road caused him pain. Mrs. Swenson, a stern-looking widow with kind eyes, welcomed them without asking questions, showing them to adjoining rooms on the 2nd floor of her tidy house. "My husband was killed standing up to men like Calvin Blackwell," she told Savannah as she helped settle Samuel into bed. "Any enemy of his is a friend of mine." The next 2 days passed in a blur of anxiety and waiting. Savannah barely left the boarding house, wary of being recognized by anyone who might be connected to Blackwell. Samuel improved steadily, his fever gone, his strength returning enough for him to sit up and take solid food. On the evening of the 3rd day since Xavier's departure, Savannah sat by the window of her room, watching the road for any sign of riders. Samuel, propped up in bed in the adjoining room, watched her with concern. "He'll come back," Samuel said, breaking the silence. He seems like a man who keeps his promises. Savannah nodded without turning from the window. I know, I can't help worrying. You care for him, Samuel observed. It wasn't a question. Savannah finally turned to face her brother. Is that so strange? He saved both our lives. Samuel smiled faintly. It's not strange at all. He's a good man. I could see that even half dead. Savannah returned to her vigil at the window. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the dusty main street of Summit Springs. Few people were about at this hour, most having returned home for evening meals. Then she saw them riders approaching from the east, moving at a steady pace. Her heart leaped, then plummeted as she counted not one but 5 horsemen. Xavier had said he would return alone. Someone's coming, she told Samuel, her voice tight with apprehension. 5 riders. Samuel struggled to sit up straighter. Can you see who it is? Savannah strained her eyes in the fading light. As the riders drew closer, she gasped in recognition. It's Xavier. And I think that's the territorial marshal with him. The others must be deputies. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that her knees weakened, and she had to grasp the windowsill for support. Xavier was alive, and he hadn't come alone. He'd brought the law with him. She hurried downstairs to the front porch just as the riders reached the boarding house. Xavier dismounted first, his eyes finding hers immediately. The tension in his face eased at the sight of her, and he strode forward while the others dismounted more slowly. You're all right, he said simply, stopping just short of embracing her. You came back, she replied, fighting the urge to throw herself into his arms. Xavier nodded, then gestured to a distinguished-looking man in a dark suit who approached them. Savannah, this is Marshal James Collins from the Territorial Office. Marshal, Miss Savannah Wilcox. The marshal removed his hat politely. Miss Wilcox, I understand you and your brother have been through a terrible ordeal. Mr. Prescott has shown me the documents and given me his account of events. I'd like to hear yours as well, and your brother's if he's able. Savannah led them inside, where Mrs. Swenson hurriedly arranged for coffee and food for the visitors. They gathered in Samuel's room, where the marshal took careful notes as Savannah and Samuel recounted everything that had happened: the attack on their ranch, their father's murder, Samuel's discovery of the forged documents, and his ambush on the return journey. When they finished, Marshal Collins nodded gravely. This corroborates what Mr. Prescott told me. The evidence of forgery alone is enough for an arrest warrant, but with your testimonies about the murder and assault, Blackwell will hang for this. When will you arrest him? Savannah asked. We ride for Lovelock at first light, the marshal replied. I've sent telegrams to other jurisdictions where Blackwell has property interests. By now, his assets should be frozen pending investigation. Xavier, who had been standing quietly by the window, spoke up. What about Sheriff Hale? He's Blackwell's cousin by marriage and has been helping spread the story that Savannah and her brother are the criminals. The marshal's expression hardened. I'm aware of that connection. One of my deputies is delivering a notice of suspension to Sheriff Hale tonight. He'll be investigated for corruption and obstruction of justice. A wave of satisfaction washed over Savannah. Justice was coming not just for her family, but for all of Blackwell's victims, including Xavier's father. As the evening progressed, plans were made for the following day. The marshal and his deputies would stay at the town's small hotel, while Xavier remained at the boarding house to ensure Savannah and Samuel's safety. When the lawmen departed for the night, Mrs. Swenson showed Xavier to a room across the hall from Savannah's. As they stood in the corridor, a moment of awkwardness passed between them. Thank you, Savannah said softly, for everything. Xavier shook his head. Don't thank me yet. Blackwell won't go quietly. Tomorrow could be dangerous. But we're not alone anymore, she pointed out. We have the marshal, the law on our side. Yes, Xavier agreed, though he still seemed troubled. Get some rest, Savannah. Tomorrow will be a long day. Before he could turn away, she caught his hand. Xavier, whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that meeting you has been the one bright light in all this darkness. His expression softened, and he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. For me as well, he murmured. More than you know. With that, he released her hand and entered his room, leaving Savannah standing in the hallway, her heart racing despite her exhaustion. Morning brought clear skies and a sense of purpose. The marshal and his deputies arrived at the boarding house shortly after dawn. Plans were finalized over breakfast. Savannah and Samuel would remain behind with one deputy, while the marshal, Xavier, and the other deputies rode to Lovelock to arrest Blackwell. As they prepared to depart, Savannah pulled Xavier aside. "Be careful," she urged. "Blackwell is dangerous, especially when cornered." Xavier nodded, his eyes serious. "I've waited 3 years for this day. I don't intend to let Blackwell escape justice now." Impulsively, Savannah reached up and kissed him, not on the cheek this time, but full on the lips. It was brief but heartfelt, a promise and a plea wrapped together. When she drew back, Xavier's eyes were dark with emotion. "I'll come back to you," he promised, his voice husky. Then he was gone, mounting his horse and riding out with the marshal and deputies, leaving Savannah to wait once more, this time with the added weight of having acknowledged the feelings growing between them. The hours crawled by. Savannah tried to occupy herself with caring for Samuel and helping Mrs. Swenson, but her thoughts were constantly with Xavier and the confrontation unfolding in Lovelock. By mid-afternoon, her nerves were stretched to breaking point. They should have reached Lovelock hours ago, she fretted, pacing the boarding house parlor while the deputy assigned to guard them watched impassively. "Why haven't we heard anything?" "These things take time, miss," the deputy offered. "The marshal will want to approach carefully, make sure all his men are in position before making the arrest." Samuel, who had insisted on coming downstairs to wait with Savannah, nodded agreement. "He's right, Savannah, and Lovelock is 20 miles away. Even if they left immediately after the arrest, they wouldn't be back yet." Savannah knew they were being reasonable, but reason did little to calm her fears. Too much could go wrong. Blackwell could resist arrest. There could be a shootout. Xavier could be hurt or worse in his determination to see justice done. The sun was beginning to set when they finally heard the sound of approaching riders. Savannah rushed to the window, counting the horsemen with her heart in her throat. 4, 5, 6. She exhaled in relief as she recognized Xavier among them, but something was wrong. The riders were moving slowly, and one horse carried what appeared to be a body draped over the saddle. "Someone's hurt," she gasped, hurrying to the door with Samuel and the deputy close behind. As the riders came to a stop before the boarding house, Savannah saw that it was indeed a body tied over one of the horses, but it wasn't any of their party. It was Calvin Blackwell, his hands bound behind him, his face bruised but his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of breath. He was alive but unconscious. Xavier dismounted first, and Savannah noted with alarm that his shirt was blood-stained, a hasty bandage wrapped around his left arm. "What happened?" she demanded, rushing to his side. "You're hurt," Xavier grimaced. "It's nothing, just a graze." Blackwell didn't come quietly. Marshal Collins dismounted more slowly, his expression grim. "That's putting it mildly." When we arrived at his ranch, he barricaded himself in with several of his men. There was a standoff, then a shootout. 2 of his men were killed, and Blackwell took a blow to the head when we finally broke in. Will he live to stand trial?" Savannah asked, looking at the unconscious form of the man who had destroyed her family. "Dr. Porter will need to assess him," the marshal replied. "But yes, I believe he will, and he'll hang for what he's done to your family and others." The next hours were a flurry of activity. Blackwell was taken to the doctor's surgery under heavy guard. Xavier's wound was tended to a bullet graze that looked worse than it was, though it clearly pained him. As night fell, the townspeople of Summit Springs, now aware of the day's events, gathered at the small hotel where Blackwell was being held under guard. There was talk of a lynch mob forming, but Marshal Collins addressed the crowd firmly, insisting that justice would be served through proper legal channels. Savannah, Xavier, and Samuel watched from the boarding house porch as the marshal dispersed the crowd. When he returned to speak with them, his expression was somber. "Dr. Porter says Blackwell will recover enough to travel. We'll take him to Carson City tomorrow for formal charging. I'll need both of you," he nodded to Savannah and Samuel, "to come to Carson City within the week to give your formal statements to the district attorney." "What about our ranch?" Samuel asked. "Our land." "The territorial governor has been briefed on the situation," the marshal assured them. "Once Blackwell's conviction is secured, you'll be able to reclaim your property and receive compensation for damages." It was more than Savannah had dared to hope for, not just justice, but the possibility of rebuilding. Yet as she looked at the burnt ruins of their family, the father and life they had lost, she wondered if returning to the ranch would ever feel right again. As if sensing her thoughts, Xavier spoke up. "You don't have to decide anything now. There's time." The marshal took his leave, returning to the hotel to secure the prisoner. Mrs. Swenson tactfully retired early, and Samuel, still weak from his injuries, soon followed, leaving Savannah and Xavier alone on the porch. They sat side by side on the steps, watching as lamps were lit in windows across the small town. The night was cool but not cold, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "It's over," Savannah said softly. "Blackwell will face justice. We have our land back, or we will soon." "I should feel triumphant, but instead I just feel empty." Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "Revenge is like that," he finally said. "You think it will fill the hole left by what you've lost, but it never does. Not completely." Savannah turned to look at him, studying his profile in the fading light. "Is that how you feel, now that Blackwell will pay for what he did to your father?" Xavier considered the question. "Part of me is satisfied, yes, but my father is still gone. Nothing changes that." He looked at her directly then. "The question is, what do we do with the rest of our lives now that this chapter is ending?" The way he said, "we" made Savannah's heart quicken. "I don't know," she admitted. "The ranch was my father's dream more than mine. Samuel might want to rebuild there, but I'm not sure I can live with those memories." Xavier nodded in understanding. "You have options. The compensation will give you means. You could go east, start fresh. Or," he trailed off and Savannah found herself holding her breath. "Or." Xavier turned to face her fully now, taking her hands in his. "Or you could come back with me to the cabin. It's peaceful there, beautiful. There's room to build a life if that's something you might want." Savannah's heart pounded in her chest. "With you?" "Yes," Xavier said simply. "With me. If I'm being too forward, or if it's too soon after everything you've been through." Savannah silenced him by placing her fingers gently against his lips. "It's not too soon. When you found me that night, bleeding and desperate, something happened between us. Something I can't explain, but I feel it. Don't you?" Xavier caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "From the first moment," he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "But I didn't want to take advantage of your vulnerability or the fact that you needed my help." "You didn't," Savannah assured him. "What I feel for you has nothing to do with gratitude. It's about who you are, your courage, your integrity, your gentle hands and fierce heart. Xavier's eyes darkened at her words. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and captured her lips with his. Unlike their earlier kiss, this one was unhurried, deep, a promise of things to come. Savannah wound her arms around his neck, drawing him closer, letting herself be enveloped in his warmth and strength. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Xavier rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "I never expected to find you," he whispered. "After my father died, I thought vengeance was all I had left, but now—" "Now," Savannah prompted gently. He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze with an intensity that took her breath away. "Now I want more. I want a future, with you if you'll have me." Savannah smiled, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." Xavier kissed her again, sealing their agreement, their promise to each other. As they sat together under the stars, Savannah thought of how far she had come from that terrible night when she ran until her feet bled, desperate and alone. Now she had justice for her family, a future to look forward to, and a man who had become more precious to her than she could have imagined possible. The path ahead would not be easy. There were still statements to give, a trial to face, decisions to make about the ranch and Samuel's future. But for the first time since the attack, Savannah felt truly hopeful. Whatever came next, she would not face it alone. 5 years later, the valley spread below them, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. From their vantage point on the ridge, Savannah could see the entire expanse of their ranch, the main house with its wide porch, the barn and corrals where their growing herd of horses grazed, the bunkhouse for the hands they employed, and the small cabin where Marcus lived when he wasn't traveling. Beside her, Xavier adjusted their son in the saddle before him. 4-year-old Thomas, named for Savannah's father, giggled with delight as the horse snorted and tossed its head. "Careful, darling," Savannah cautioned, though she knew Xavier would never let any harm come to their son. Xavier smiled at her, the lines at the corners of his eyes crinkling with happiness. "He's a natural horseman, just like his mother," Savannah laughed, "and stubborn like his father." From her own saddle, their 2-year-old daughter Lily reached toward her brother. "Me too, Papa." "Me ride big horse. When you're bigger," Xavier promised, leaning over to kiss the top of her blonde head. "For now, you stay with Mama." The sound of another horse approaching made them all turn. Samuel rode up the trail, waving as he spotted them. In the years since Blackwell's trial and execution, Samuel had grown into a confident man. He had married a schoolteacher from Carson City the previous year, and they were expecting their first child. "Thought I'd find you up here," Samuel called as he reached them. "Showing the children the kingdom again," Xavier chuckled. "Something like that. Everything all right at the house?" "Fine. Rebecca's resting, and Marcus just got back from Virginia City with the supplies." Samuel gazed out over the valley. "Hard to believe how far we've come in 5 years." Savannah followed his gaze, remembering. After Blackwell's trial, they had decided not to return to the original Wilcox ranch. There were too many painful memories there. Instead, they had used the compensation money to purchase land adjoining Xavier and Marcus's property, creating a much larger ranch that they now ran together. The Wild Creek Ranch, as they called it, had prospered beyond their expectations. Xavier's skill with horses and Savannah's head for business had proven to be a powerful combination. They bred and trained some of the finest horses in the territory, supplying mounts for the army, stage companies, and private buyers throughout the West. "I never thought I'd have this," Savannah admitted softly. "After that night, running barefoot and bleeding through the darkness, I thought my life was over. I never imagined I could be this happy again." Xavier reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "You ran until you couldn't run anymore. Then you kept fighting. That's who you are, Savannah Prescott, the strongest person I've ever known." She squeezed his hand, her heart full. "We fought together, and we built this together." Samuel cleared his throat. "And speaking of building, Rebecca sent me to tell you dinner will be ready soon. Marcus is making his famous venison stew." "We're coming," Savannah assured him. As Samuel turned his horse and started down the trail, she lingered a moment longer with Xavier and their children, taking in the view of the home and life they had created. From tragedy had come triumph. From loss had come love. And from that desperate night when she ran until her feet bled and a cowboy lifted her onto his horse had come a future brighter than she could have dreamed. "Ready to go home?" Xavier asked, his eyes warm with love as he looked at her. Savannah nodded, smiling at her husband and children. "Yes," she said, "let's go home." As they rode down the ridge together toward the lights of their ranch house, where family and friends awaited them, Savannah felt a profound sense of peace. The scars on her feet had long since faded, but the journey they represented had brought her here to this man, these children, this life full of love and purpose. It was more than safety Xavier had carried her to that night on his horse. It was her future, her happiness, her destiny. And for that, she would be forever grateful.